You know, I love that I have all these four-wheel drive vehicles. Let's go ahead and set you guys up. Yeah. There we go. I love that I have all four-wheel drive vehicles. I mean, for example, my Jeep here, she's four-wheel drive. My truck, she's four-wheel drive. The one I drive for work is four-wheel drive. Well, all-wheel drive, so close enough. Because there's a lot of stuff that is a lot of fun to try and drive through, a lot of fun to try and get through out here in the boonies when it snows. For example, I mean, we got 6 inches of snow last night. The night before I didn't have to work, we got 18 inches of snow. I love it. We're going to go skiing. We're going to go have fun. But right now, we're going to be reading Victor Hugo, his Les Mis series. We are in Fantine, book 1, and we are on chapter 10. So let's go ahead and get started here for you guys. A short while after the date of the letter quoted above, the bishop did something that the whole town found far more dangerous than his excursion across the bandit-infested mountains. In the countryside near Denis, there was a man who lived alone. This man, to state the startling fact right off, had been a member of the National Convention. His name was G. The narrow world of Denis spoke of the former deputy with a sort of horror. A revolutionary conventionist, think of it. That was in the time when people thee and thou'd one another and called everyone citizen. This man was practically a monster. He had not exactly voted for the execution of the king, but almost. He was half a regicide. Why then, with the restoration of the legitimate monarchy, had they not arraigned him before the provost court? He would not have been beheaded, probably. But even if clemency prevailed, he might have been banished for life. Besides, he was an atheist, like the others. Babblings of geese against a vulture. But this G, a vulture? Yes, if one should judge him by the savageness of his isolation. Because he had not voted for the king's execution. He was not included in the sentence of exile, and could remain in France. He lived about an hour's walk from town, far from any hamlet or road, in a desolate ravine of a wild valley. He was said to have a sort of shelter there, some clearing. He had no neighbors, and nobody even passed by. Since he had come, the path leading to the place had become overgrown, and people spoke of it as they would of a hangman's house. From time to time, however, the bishop thoughtfully gazed at the spot on the horizon where a clump of trees indicated a former conventionist's ravine, and he would say, "There lives a lonely soul." And deep down he would add, "I owe him a visit." But we must confess that this idea, natural enough at first glance, seemed strange, impracticable, almost repulsive. After a few moments' reflection, for at heart he shared the general impression, and the conventionist inspired him somehow with that feeling, akin to hatred, so well expressed by the word aversion. The shepherd should not recoil from the diseased sheep. Oh, but such a black sheep. The good bishop was confused. Sometimes he would start out in that direction, but then turn back. At last, one day, The news was circulated in town that the young shepherd who served the conventionalist in his retreat had come for a doctor. That the poor man was dying. That he was paralyzed and could not live through the night. Thank God, someone said. The bishop took his cane, put on his cloak because he wanted to hide the badly worn cassock, and also because the night wind would be rising, and set out. The setting sun had nearly touched the horizon when the bishop reached the accursed spot. A certain quickening of the pulse told him he was near the lair. He jumped over a ditch, cleared a hedge, made his way through the brush fence, found himself in a dilapidated garden, and after boldly walking across to the open ground, suddenly, behind some high shrubbery, he caught sight of the retreat. It was a low, impoverished hut, small and clean, with a little vine clinging to the front. In front of the door, in an old peasant chair on rollers, sat a man with white hair. Smiling toward the setting sun, the young shepherd stood beside him, handing him a bowl of milk. As the bishop watched, the old man spoke. "Thank you," he said. "I won't need anything else." And as his smile moved from the son to rest on the boy, the bishop stepped forward. And the sound of his footsteps, the old man turned his head, and his face expressed as much surprise as one could feel at the end of a long life. "This is the first time since I've lived here," he said, "that I have had a visitor. Who are you, monsieur?" "My name is Benevue Muriel," the bishop replied. "Benevue Muriel? I have heard that name before. Are you the one that people call Monseigneur Benevue?" "I am," the old man went on, half smiling. "Then you are my bishop." "In a way." "Welcome, monsieur." The conventionalist extended his hand to the bishop, who did not take it. He only said, "I am glad to find that I have been misinformed. You do not appear to be very ill." "Monseigneur," replied the old man, "I will soon be better." He paused and then added, "In 3 hours, I will be dead." Then he went on, "I am something of a physician. I know the steps by which death approaches. Yesterday, only my feet were cold. Today, the cold has crept to my knees. Now, it has reached the waist. When it reaches the heart, all will be over. The sunset is lovely, don't you think? I had myself wheeled out for one last look at nature. You can speak to me. That won't tire me. You are right to come see a dying man. It is right that these moments should have witnesses. Everyone has his dream. I would like to live till dawn. But I know I have less than 3 hours left. It will be night. But no matter. Dying is simple. It does not take daylight. So be it. I will die by starlight." The old man turned toward the shepherd. "Little one, go to bed. You stayed up last night. You're tired." The child went into the hut. The old man followed him with his eyes and added, as though to himself, "While he's sleeping, I'll die. The two slumbers are good brothers." The bishop was not as moved as he might have been. This did not seem a godly death. We must tell everything, for the inconsistencies of great souls should be mentioned. He who had laughed so heartily at His Highness was still slightly shocked at not being called Monseigneur, and was almost tempted to answer citizen. He felt a desire for the burlesque familiarity common enough with doctors and priests, but not proper for him. This conventionalist, after all, the representative of the people, had wielded power on this earth, and perhaps for the first time in his life the bishop felt in a mood to be severe. The conventionalist, however, treated him with modest consideration and cordiality, in which one might perceive a humility proper to one so nearly dust unto dust. The bishop, for his part, though generally free from curiosity, which he found himself almost offensive, could not keep from examining the conventionalist with an intention that, as it did not spring from sympathy, would have seemed unconsiderable regarding any other man. But he regarded a conventionalist as an outlaw, even beyond the law of charity. G, with his calm, almost erect figure and resonant voice, was one of those noble octogenaries who are the marvel of doctors. The Revolution preceded many such men equal to the era. One felt that here was a man tested by life. Though so near death, he appeared healthy. His bright glances, his firm speech, and the muscular movements of his shoulders seemed almost enough to discount death. Azrael, the Islamic angel of this vulture, would have turned back, thinking he had the wrong door. G appeared to be dying because he wished to die. There was liberty in his dying. Only his legs were paralyzed. His feet were cold and dead. But his head lived in the full power of life and clarity. At this solemn moment, G seemed like the king in the Oriental tale, flesh above and marble below. The bishop seated himself on a nearby stone. Their conversation began abruptly. "I congratulate you," he said in a tone of reprimand. "At least you did not vote for the king's execution." The conventionalist did not seem to notice the bitter emphasis placed on the words, "at least." The smile vanished from his face. "Do not congratulate me too much, monsieur. I did vote for the destruction of the tyrant." And the tone of austerity confronted the tone of severity. "What do you mean?" asked the bishop. "I meant that man has one tyrant: ignorance. I voted for the abolition of that tyrant. That tyrant fathered royalty, which is authority springing from the false, whereas science is authority springing from the true. Man should be governed by science." "And conscience," added the bishop. "They are the same. Conscience is science." Monsieur Bennevue listened with some amazement to this language, as it was new to him. The revolutionary went on. "As to Louis XVI, I said no. I do not believe I have the right to kill a man, but I feel it a duty to exterminate evil. I voted for the downfall of the tyrant. That is, for the abolition of prostitution for women, of slavery for man, of darkness for the child. In voting for the Republic, I voted for that. I voted for fraternity, for harmony, for dawn. I helped to overthrow prejudice and error. Their downfall brings light. We brought down the old world. A jug of misery overturned becomes a vessel of joy to humanity." "Joy alloyed?" said the bishop. "You might say troubled joy. And at present, after this fatal return of the past that we call 1814, vanished joy. Alas, the work was imperfect, I admit. We demolished an ancient order of things physically, but not entirely in the idea. To destroy abuses is not enough. Habits must also be changed. The windmill has gone, but the wind is still there. You have demolished. To demolish may be useful, but I distrust destruction made in anger. Justice has its anger, Monsieur Bishop, and the wrath of justice is an element of progress. No matter what they say, the French Revolution is the greatest advance taken by mankind since the coming of Christ. Incomplete it may be, but it is sublime. It loosened all the secret chains of society. It softened all hearts. It calmed, appeased, enlightened. It caused waves of civilization to flow over the earth. It was good. The French Revolution is the consecration of humanity. The bishop could not help murmuring, "Yes, and 93?" The former deputy sat up in his chair with an almost mournful solemnity. And as well as a dying person could, he exclaimed, "Ah, of course, 93. I was expecting that. A cloud had been forming for 1,500 years. And the end of 15 centuries, it burst. You are condemning the thunderbolt." Without perhaps acknowledging it, the bishop was moved. However, he regained his composure and replied, "The judge speaks in the name of justice, the priest in the name of pity, which is only a more exalted justice. Such a thunderbolt should not make mistakes." And he added, glaring at the revolutionary, "Louis the 16th? The conventionalist stretched out his hand and seized the bishop's arm. "Louis the 17th, let's see. For who do you weep? For the innocent child? Good. I weep with you. For the royal child, I ask time to reflect. In my view, the brother of Cartouche, an innocent child, hung by a rope under his arms in the place of De Greve till he died, for the sole crime of being a brother of Cartouche, is a no less painful sight than the grandson of Louis the 15th. An innocent child murdered in the tower of the temple for the sole crime of being the grandson of Louis XV. "Monsieur," the bishop said, "I disapprove of this coupling of names. Cartouche or Louis XV? For which one are you concerned?" There was a moment of silence. The bishop almost regretted that he had come, and yet he felt strangely and inexplicably moved. The former deputy went on, "Oh, Monsieur Priest, you do not like the harshness of truth, but Christ loved it. He took a scourge and purged the temple. His flashing whip was a rude truth-teller. When he said, 'Sinit parvulus,' he made no distinctions among the little ones. He was not pained at coupling the dolphin of Barabbas with the dauphin of Herod. Monsieur, innocence is its own crown. Innocence can only be noble. She is an August in rags, as in the Fleur de Lis." "That's true," the bishop said quietly. "I repeat," the old man continued, "you've mentioned Louis XVII. I agree. Let's weep together for all the innocent, all the martyrs, all the children, humble as well as mighty. I'm for that. But then, as I said, we must go farther back than 93, and our tears must start before Louis XVII. I will weep for the children of kings with you. I will weep with me for the children of the people. I weep for them all," the bishop said. "Equally," G exclaimed. "And if the balance tips, let it be on the side of the people. They have suffered longer." There was silence again, broken at last by the old man. He raised himself up on one elbow, pinched one of his cheeks, as one does unconsciously in examining the forming an opinion, then addressed the bishop with a look full of all the energies of dying. It was like an explosion. Yes, monsieur, the people have been suffering for a long time. And then, sir, that's not all. Why do you come to question me and speak to me of Louis XVII? I don't know you. Since I have been in this region, I have lived within these walls all alone, never going beyond them, seeing no one but this child who helps me. Your name has, it is true, reached me confusedly, and I must say not without respect. But no matter. Clever men have so many ways of impressing the good in simple people. For instance, I did not hear the sound of your carriage. You had undoubtedly left it behind the thicket, down there at the fork in the road. You have told me you are the bishop, but that tells me nothing about your moral integrity. Now then, I repeat my question. Who are you? You are a bishop, a prince of the church, one of those men covered with gold, insignia, and wealth, and fat sinecure. The sign, the See of Denis, 15,000 francs per year, 10,000 francs contingent, total 25,000 francs. You have kitchens and retinues, give fine dinners, eat good poultry on Friday, show off in your gaudy coaches like peacocks, lackeys in front of lackeys behind. You have palaces, and travel around in the name of Jesus Christ, who walked barefoot. You are a prelate. Rents, palaces, horses, valets, a good table, all the sinuous pleasures of life. You have these like all the rest, and like all the rest you enjoy them. Very well. But that says too much and not enough. It does not enlighten me as to your intrinsic worth. What is unique to yourself? You, who probably come with a claim of bringing me wisdom. To whom am I speaking? Who are you? The bishop bowed his head and replied, Vermis sum. An earthworm in a carriage, grumbled the old man. It was the truth of the conversationalist to be haughty and the bishop to be humble. The bishop replied gently, Monsieur, so be it. But explain to me how my carriage, which is there a few steps beyond the trees, how my good table and Friday poultry, how my 25,000 livres of income, how my palace and my lackeys prove that pity is not a virtue, that kindness is not a duty, and that 93 was not an outrage. The old man passed his hand across his forehead as if to dispel a cloud. Before answering you, he said, I beg your pardon. I have wronged you, monsieur. You are my guest. I should be more polite. You are discussing my ideas. I should confine myself to combating your reasoning. Your wealth and your possessions are advantages I have over you in the debate, but it is not in good taste to dwell on them. I promise I won't use them again. Thank you, the bishop said. G went on. Let us return to the explanation you asked me to give. Where were we? What were you saying to me? That 93 was an outrage? An outrage, yes, the bishop said. What do you think of Marat applauding at the guillotine? What do you think of Bazat chanting the Te Deum during the persecution of the Huguenots? The response was severe, but it reached its target like a dagger. The bishop was staggered, speechless. It shocked him to hear Bazat spoken of in that manner. The best men have their blind spots, and sometimes they feel almost crushed at how little respect logic can show them. The conventionalist began to gasp. An agonizing asthma that mingles with the last breath broke his voice. Yet his lucid soul still shone in his eyes. He went on. Let's say a few more words. I would like that. Beyond the revolution, which, taken as a whole, is an immense human affirmation. 93, alas, is a reply. You think it's an outrage, but the whole monarchy, monsieur, Carrier, is a bandit. But what can you say about Montrevel? Fouquier Train Villa is a wretch. But what is your opinion of Lomignon Bevel? Millard is frightful. But what of Salut Tavines? The elder of Dachine is ferocious. But what epitaph would you furnish me for the elder Letheriel? Jaudin Coupe Tiet is a monster, but less than the Marquis of Deluvis. Monsieur, I mourn Marie Antoinette, Archduchess and Queen, but I also mourn that poor Huguenot woman who, in 1685, under Louis le Grand, monsieur, while nursing her child, was stripped to the waist and tied to a post while her child was held before her. Her breast swelled with milk, and her heart with anguish. The baby, weak and famished, seeing the breast, cried in agony. And the executioner said to the nursing mother, "Recant," giving her the choice between the death of her child and the death of her conscience. What do you say to this tantalus torture inflicted on the mother? Monsieur, remember this. The French Revolution had its reasons. Its anger will be pardoned by the future. The result is the better world. The most terrible of blows are the caress for the human race. I must be brief. I must stop. I have too good a cause, and I am dying. And no longer looking at the bishop, the old man concluded his thought with these few tranquil words. Yes, the brutalities of progress are called revolutions. When they are over, men recognize that the human race was harshly treated, but that it has moved forward. The revolutionary did not know that he had successively demolished all the bishop's interior defenses, one after the other. There was one left, however, and from it the last resource of Monseigneur Benevieu's resistance came forth these words, in which nearly all the harshness of the opening reappeared. Progress ought to believe in God. The good cannot have an imperious servant. An atheist is an evil leader of the human race. The old representative of the people did not answer. He was trembling. He looked up into the sky, and a tear gathered slowly in his eye. When the lid was full, the tear rolled down the ashen cheek, and he said, almost stammering, low, talking to himself, his eyes gazing toward, "O thou, O ideal, thou alone dost exist." The bishop felt an inexpressible emotion. After a brief silence, the old man raised his finger toward heaven and said, "The infinite exists. It is there. If the infinite had no me, the me would be its limit. It would not be the infinite. In other words, it would not be. But it is. Then it has a me. This me of the infinite is God." The dying man pronounced these last words in a loud voice and with a shudder of ecstasy, as if he saw someone when he had spoken. His eyes closed. The effort had exhausted him. It was evident that in 1 minute he had lived through the few hours remaining to him. What he had said had brought him near to the one who was in death. The last moment was at hand. The bishop realized that time was pressing. He had come as a priest. From extreme coldness he had gone gradually to extreme emotion. He glanced at those closed eyes. He took that old, wrinkled, icy hand and drew close to the dying man. "This is the hour of God. Do you not think it would be sad if we had met in vain?" The conventionalist reopened his eyes. Calm was imprinted on his face, already touched with shadow. "Monsieur Bishop," he said with a deliberation that came perhaps still more from the dignity of his soul than from the waning of his strength, "I have spent my life in meditation, study, and contemplation. I was 60 years old when my country called me and ordered me to take part in her affairs. I obeyed. There were abuses. I fought them. There were tyrannies. I destroyed them. There were rights and principles. I proclaimed and professed them. The soil was invaded. I defended it. France was threatened. I offered her my breast. I was not rich. I am poor. I was one of the masters of the state. The vaults of the bank were piled with coins. So I had to strengthen the walls or they would have fallen under the weight of gold and silver. I dined with the Rue des Abreux Secs at 22 sous for the meal. I scoured the oppressed. I solaced the suffering. True, I tore the drapery from the altar, but it was to dress the wounds of the country. I have always supported the forward march of humanity toward the light, and I have sometimes resisted as progress that lacked pity. On occasion, I have protected my own adversaries, your friends. At Pny, in Flanders, at the very spot where the Moravian kings had their summer palace, there is a monastery of Urbanists, the Abbey of St. Clare of Belmeux, which I saved in 1793. I did my duty according to my strength, and what good I could. After that, I was hunted, hounded, pursued, persecuted, slandered, railed at, spit upon, cursed, banished. For many years now, with my white hairs, I have noticed that some people believed they had a right to despise me. To the poor, ignorant coward, I have the face of the damned. And hating no man myself, I accepted the isolation of hatred. Now I am 86 years old. I am about to die. What have you come to ask me?" "Your blessing," said the bishop, and he fell to his knees. When the bishop raised his eyes, the face of the old man looked noble. He had died. The bishop went home profoundly absorbed in the thought. He spent the whole night in prayer. The next day, some individuals, their curiosity piqued, tried to talk to him about the conventionalist, G, but he simply pointed to heaven. From that moment, he redoubled his tenderness and brotherly love for the weak and the suffering. Every allusion to that old scoundrel G sent him into a strange reverie. No one could say that the passing of that soul in his presence, and the reflection of the great conscience upon his own, had not had its effect on the approach of perfection. The pastoral visit was of course an occasion for the gossip of the local circles. Was the beside of such a man the place for a bishop? Of course you could expect no conversation there. All these revolutionaries are black sliders. Then why go? What had he gone there to see? He must have wanted to see a soul carried away by the devil. On one day, a dowager of the impertinent sort that believed themselves witty remarked, "Monseigneur, people ask when your lordship will wear the red bonnet." "Ah, ha! That is a mighty keller," replied the bishop. "Luckily, those who hate it in the bonnet worship it in the chapeau." So he went to go see this man who he thought kind of was an atheist, but it turned out he not necessarily was an atheist, because he kept on talking about God and kept on talking about the things that he believed and that he had seen and that he knew. Interesting. What do you guys think? Anyway, stay tuned for the next chapter of Les Mis, Book 1 of Fantine. Thank you, and you have a blessed day.